You're now tuned in to the latest, the newest, hottest show on YouTube. I got a story to tell. Hosted by your boy, OG Sonny Blanco. Fire interviews, worldly topics, and much more. Stay tuned. OG Sonny Blanco. I got a story to tell. You heard?
Good people, what's rockin'? You're now tuned in. You already know, OG Sonny Blanco, I got a story to tell, you heard? But yo, today, right? Today we gonna do something different. We gonna do a little something different right now. I may not be as eloquent as I would like to be. I could give you a few references if you wanna hear this topic expounded upon eloquently. You know what I mean? My dude UBN TV, shout it out. Timeline History TV, shout it out, right? But if you want to hear more eloquently, you might want to go check those brothers, right? I can only give it to you how I give it to you. No freaky, right? But it's all actual facts. You understand? So let's get into it, right? We gonna do a little history lesson today, right? Shout out Zeke Black. Word. I was watching his joint earlier today, right? He was talking about hip-hop, right? And like the history and the origins of hip-hop and where rapping came from and all of that, right? I want to piggyback off that topic, but I'm going to do that down the road. This right here, he just sparked the idea. So this right here, we going to talk about history real quick, right? And right now, this may be a part 1, part 2, part 3. And this part 1 right here, I'm talking to my Spanish brothers, right? My Latin American brothers and sisters, right? The Hispanics and all that, right? I'm talking to them today, right? I noticed that a lot of Spanish people, you get culture and nationality mixed up with race. Let's back up. Let's say that again. I noticed that a lot of Spanish people, you get nationality and your culture mixed up with race. Two could be in the same pot. The nationality and culture could be stirred up in the same pot. But the race is almost a pot by itself. Let's get into it. And this is with all love. This is with all love and all respect. Because I love my people. Don't matter the nationality. Don't matter your culture. It don't matter your creed. It don't matter your race. I love my people. But I am pro-black. Not a racist, but I'm definitely pro-black. So let's get into it, right? So now, Spanish people, my Spanish brothers and sisters, my Dominicans, my Puerto Ricans, my Panamanians, my Cubans, Honduras, you know what I mean? List goes on. List goes on and on and on. But I'm talking to you all, right? When people ask you your race, you're quick to say, oh, I'm Puerto Rican. Or, oh, I'm Dominican. Or, oh, I'm Cuban. But you're blacker than my beard. You're blacker than my shirt. You blacker than my fresh wallies I got on, you heard? You blacker than all of that, right? So your race is black. You're not African American, no, but your race is black. That's a fact, right? Your nationality and your culture is Dominican or Puerto Rican or Cuban or Panamanian. That's your culture. That's your nationality. It's not your race. So let's break it down. They always give Columbus credit for discovering America, right? Which he didn't. He never stepped foot on American soil, North American soil. He never stepped foot on it. He discovered so-called North America, so-called Latin America and Central America, right? That's what he so-called discovered. But he wasn't the biggest explorer from Spain. The biggest one came after him, and his name was De Soto. Yeah, De Soto came all the way into the Americas, had war with the Indians and all of that. He so-called discovered the Mississippi River. How can you discover a river that people was already fishing, eating, cleaning, and living out of before you even got there? But that's how they do. He so-called discovered the Mississippi River, right? That's De Soto. But let's talk, good Spanish people. And Fat Joe was talking on this not too long ago. He got flack for it. He caught a lot of flack for it. But I've always been under this impression. I've been under this impression since I was about 13. Because that's when I got into the nations of the gods and the herbs. Shout it out. Peace to the gods and the herbs. Alright? So, bam. So, my Spanish brothers and sisters, in a way, you're just as bad as African Americans. And when I say just as bad, I mean you're just as lost as African Americans. But because of your culture and because of your nationality, you held on to your culture and your nationality a lot better than African Americans did, because ours was stripped from us totally. They tried to strip yours totally, but they couldn't, because you remained in your country. It's kind of hard to strip you of your nationality. It's kind of hard to strip you of your culture when you remain in your country. Africans didn't remain in the country. Now, granted, I'm not under the impression that all black people came from Africa. Granted, this world at one time was called Asia, and it was all put together before the separations with the oceans and all that stuff. You had people that was walking across I forgot what they called that. But they was walking across, and they came up from Alaska and all type places and came all the way into America. From India and came all the way into America. What make you think black people didn't do that either? And got with the indigenous people of North America, the so-called Indians, and started raising families and intermingling and all of that. This is why, not to get off topic, but it all fits. This is why when you do a DNA test and you have a lot of black people who scream, yo, I got Indian in my family. I got Indian in my family. That's not a rarity. That was actually real common, especially back then. Real common, before slavery. Real common with the indigenous people that was already here. That was common. This is why when you go do your DNA test, is why I would never do one. When you go do your DNA test, it's almost impossible to pinpoint. That's why you have a DNA test and they say, oh, you're from Zimbabwe, or oh, you're from Senegal, or oh, you're from over here. That's because it's been proven within 20 generations, you may have over 2,000 grandfathers within 20 generations. All that DNA gets mixed up within your DNA. There's only 2 DNAs that do not change. One is the X chromosome that comes from the father. And one is not the Y chromosome, but it's another chromosome that comes from the mother's lineage. But everything in between gets lost. But I say that to say this. The Indians, their tribal leaders refused them to give any DNA samples. Refused it. They couldn't come onto the reservation and talk about that. They refused it. So when you go get your DNA, that's why there's no Native American or indigenous people in your research, in your DNA research, because they didn't allow the pale face to come over and start sticking them and talk about DNA and all that good stuff. So 9 times out of 10, it's more likely than not, a lot of you black people have Indian in your family. But back to the point. When I say you're just as worse as Africans that came over, not as worse, but just as worse, because your culture was stripped slightly, maybe more so than slightly. Mind you, your original language wasn't Spanish. Let that spin around real quick. Mind you, your original language wasn't Spanish. Now let's back up before we get into that. We have to understand that most Caribbean islands belong to the Arawak Indians and so-called Spanish people. Most Caribbean islands. During the slave trade, more black people got dropped off in the Caribbean islands. More people from Africa got dropped off in the Caribbean islands because it was first land. This is why Columbus never made it into North America. He made it to Central America. Yeah, because they wanted to see first land. Oh, they was happy. They've been on boats for months, storms and dealing with the weather and all type stuff for months, running out of food, running out of water, running out of everything for months. They were happy to see land. So this is how Caribbean islands, Jamaica, Antigua, Dominica, St. Lucia, Trinidad, Virgin Islands, Panama, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba. This is how most of those islands have a strong Afrocentric background and have abundance of black people. This is why black people took over islands such as Jamaica and so on, because more Africans got dropped off from those Caribbean islands that ever made it to America. So let's get back to the point. The point was, your culture has been stripped too, because your language wasn't Spanish. How can your language be Spanish and you didn't know what a Spaniard was? The language Spanish comes from the Spaniards. The Spaniards come from Spain. They were one of the first conquerors, if not the first. It was the Spaniards and the Portuguese. Later on came the British and the French. The first were the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Spaniards and the Portuguese. They came, they raped, they pillaged, they did what they did. They tore nations down. They did what they did. They conquered. They did what they did. Along with that conquering comes the killing of men, women, and children. But those who lived became slaves. And then you're stripped of all your memorabilia. You're stripped of that. All the knowledge that you've been teaching, you're stripped of that. All your statues and whatnot, you're stripped of that. And they strip you of your language because everybody now has to be on one accord. And their accord, the Spaniards' accord, was the right accord according to them. So you're going to be on their accord. So forget whatever language you were speaking in Puerto Rico before the Spaniards arrived. Forget what language you were speaking in Cuba before the Spanish arrived. They conquered. The Spaniards conquered your country, your island, and made you speak Spanish. Who knows what your original language was? So you've been stripped. Who knows what your original names were? It was the Spaniards who gave you the names Jesus. It was the Spaniards who gave you the names Isabella. It was the Spaniards who gave you the name Juan. So who knows what your original name was? Alejandro. Who knows what your original name was? You can't have a Spaniard's name or a Spanish name and you haven't even ran across a Spaniard yet. So let's talk about it. Now, along with all those black people that came from Africa that got dropped off on these islands, once again, there's a lot of intermingling going on. There were some slaves, husky men, stout men, put together men who were hung low, like myself, no freaky, but who were hung low. I ain't the tall one, but you know what I mean? But who was hung low and all that, who were just brought to stud. They were studs. To populate, they were studs. So there's a lot of intermingling going on. So you become the original natives of that island, whether it be the Arawak Indians, whatever they called them, the original natives. The natives of that island started intermingling with the black people. That's why so-called Spanish people, so-called Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Cubans, Panama, brothers darker than my shirt down in Panama. But they'll tell you they're not black. They'll tell you they're Panamanian. Type of peanut butter and jelly shit is that? Your country is Panama. So therefore your nationality is Panamanian. But that's not your race. Within all the intermingling going on, you have some Puerto Ricans and some Dominicans with broader noses than me, with more Afrocentric features than me. So how you gonna how you gonna say I'm not black? Oh, I'm Dominican. Oh no, I'm Puerto Rican. I'm not black. Then you have to understand the same hand that was dealt to us was the same hand that was dealt to you. You ever seen the movie Hotel Rwanda? Great movie. Don Cheadle shot it out. I love him in that movie. Great movie. But do the knowledge to Hotel Rwanda. Do the knowledge. Right? It was the Hutus and the Tutsis. Right? I think at one time at the beginning the Tutsis were in power. Right? Or either way around. But either way, one was in power. Yeah. Because the white conquerors who came before left them in power. Why did they leave them in power? Because they were more tall. They were slimmer. They had narrower noses, thinner lips. They were more light. They were light-skinned. So they left them. The Belgians left them in charge when they left the country, and left them over the Hutus, who got tight, who was tight when the Belgians was there. Now they super tight because you got these so-called uppity or pretty blacks over us. So when it was time to rebel, they took all the way over and they damn near annihilated the Tutsis. That was the whole Hotel Rwanda thing. The same shit, the same scheme they used there, the same scheme they used against Africans, the same paper bag scheme. It's the same scheme they use with you. That's why at one point in time, especially back in the day, most of your superstars that were Spanish superstars were of Spaniard descent or Spaniard features. They didn't have the Puerto Rican features. They didn't have the dark skin. They were lighter skin. Right now, because of the trade I'm in, there's a lot of Spanish people that work with me, especially the Mexicans. Right now, when you ride by and you see a bunch of Spanish people in the summertime, right? But they got long sleeves on, they got hoodies on and glasses and shit covering their mouth. They ain't doing that for COVID-19. They been doing that. They ain't doing that for no health reasons. They been doing that. The Mexicans and whatnot do that when you see them in the summertime like that, on a construction site, on a landscaping crew, whatever. If you ride past, you see them, they all out like that. They do that because they women don't like them when they get dark skin. The women don't like them. They want them to be fair skinned, to look more Spaniard or more Anglo-Saxon or more Caucasian. That's a fact. That's a whole fact. Look at Jamaica. They was doing it before Vibes Cartel, but because of who Vibes is and who he was and what he stood for, he turned the island out. But before Vibes, they were doing that, bleaching their skin. Crazy. In America, back in the day, they were bleaching their skin crazy. I remember my auntie used to keep a little white jaw with the red whiting on it. Skin bleaching and all that good stuff. That brown paper bag theory. It wasn't just Africans who had to go with that brown paper bag theory. It was my so-called Spanish brothers and sisters too. Look at your country. Look at those in power. Look at their skin color of those in power. They from the same country you are. But the ones in power, 9 times out of 10, they have the fairer skin. So please, to my Spanish brothers and sisters, when you ask your nationality, tell them proudly, I'm Dominican, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Cuban, I'm Panamanian, I'm from Honduras. Say it proudly, right? When they ask you your culture, scream the same thing proudly. But if you're not of fair skin, and they ask you your race, you're black. Simple. Simple, you're black. I give you one better. I believe it's 1828ish or somewhere around there. I'm a history buff. But before 1828, next time we talk about this, because this is going to be a part 1 and a part 2. And the part 2, that's going to be the first thing I'm going to show. Is where it came from. But in 1828, there was a fella who wrote a book who had just got over here. And when he described the so-called Indians, the natives of America, he described them as dark skin, broad chest, bigger facial features, but extremely dark skin. He compared them, he said they were dark skin like that of the Ethiopians. This is a fact. dark skin like that of the Ethiopians. It wasn't until the Spaniards conquered that your skin became fairer. The reason why, because once again, the intermingling. The Spaniards brought 600 soldiers over. Say if that nation or if that tribe had maybe 20 or 30 soldiers, say it was a tribe of 50 people, count the women and children and all that good stuff. If you bring 600 soldiers, what's going to happen to those 50 or 60 so-called Indians and Native Americans? They annihilated. But if they kept the women and whatnot, which they did, they were having intercourse with the women. Hence, half Spaniard, half original Native American. Hence the skin complexion. All that. Now, if you go after 1828, you start to see the change. This is a fact. So this isn't hate. This isn't racism. This is conscious thought. Conscious thought. That's all this is. Don't take a rocket scientist. Any smart person, an intellectual person, or some person with some type of education about them, and you're into this, could break it down to its bare minimum. Ain't nothing new under the sun. We don't have to make everything complicated. But do your history, right? Along with doing your history, do the history of others. Because that's the only way you're going to be able to talk about what you want to talk about and be sound doing it. You heard? Part 1, history. We got more coming. My Spanish brothers and sisters, your nationality is wherever you're from. Your culture is whatever you want to call yourself and all that good stuff. But don't get that mixed up with your race. OG Sonny Blanco, I got a story to tell you, heard? Easy.
You're now tuned in to the latest, the newest, hottest show on YouTube. I got a story to tell. Hosted by your boy, OG Sonny Blanco. Fire interviews, worldly topics, and much more. Stay tuned, OG Sonny Blanco. I got a story to tell. You heard?